bit more sign of autumn and have a look, see what there is to see. So we'll do that. I'll turn the camera around and we will go for a wander. I mean, you can see the wood ahead, and you can see, the leaves to a large extent are still pretty green. Not a lot of autumn colour happening as yet, although when we get a bit closer we'll start to see there are some leaves. And some of the trees are just starting to colour up a bit. But autumn does seem quite late in recent years. Anyway, we'll wander up here into the paddock. Now this field is one of the ones that we were maintaining by having a small herd of cattle grazing it earlier in the year. We had a broadcast where we went to see the cattle a little while back in the other side of the reserve when they first arrived. This is grassland, and we use the cattle to keep it down, slightly suppress the grass to allow more wildflowers and other things to develop here. And you can still see the signs of where the cattle have been. You can see some droppings here, and you can see some tunnels through the droppings where presumably insects, dung beetles and the like have had a look at it, had a feed on it. So that all provides interesting habitat. And then here you've got one of the small ponds that we have in the reserve. It's pretty much a seasonal pond. In the middle of summer there wouldn't be any water in here. At the moment it's not far off full. Pipe here is the main drainage outlet for this pond, and you can see the water level is not yet up to that. But there's a fair amount of water standing in here, and you can see the willow trees growing in the pond, and they've started to go a bit more into their autumnal mode though than some of the other trees. Willow's rather a plant that's tolerant of damp conditions, so this little clump of them grow here. There's other bits of willow scattered throughout the site as well, but the damp area is helpful for it. It's an area that it can really do well in. And you can see that we've maintained these willows by a method known as pollarding, which is cutting them off at about head height or so. It doesn't kill the plant, they still have a strong rootstock, and as you can see there's lots of suckering regrowth, but what it means is the trees stay smaller. And that can matter with willow, because as you can probably also see here, willow has a tendency to be alive and to rot at the core at the same time. And if you've got very tall willow trees with limbs, they can shed a limb, can fall on people. So this method of maintaining them allows you to have a lot of productive wood, a lot of material for animals that use it, but also to keep this in a way that's less likely to be a problem. And to force a lot of this generation, so it was a commercial way of managing this sort of wood as well. You forced a lot of this sort of sticky growth, which was very useful for creating willow wands that you could weave things with or use as sticks and so on. And it's now done mainly for conservation management purposes, which is what we've been doing here. And yeah, you can see the willow leaves have, largely fallen off actually, and the ones that have remained, maybe if we go a bit closer. Going too much closer means I stand in the pond. But you can see hopefully that some of the leaves that are still there have also gone brown. So there's a bit of autumn starting. And we'll walk from here into the wood. And we'll see what conditions we can see there, see what there is to observe. I just did something weird there. On. Anyway, wandering now into the main body of the reserve. A lot of noise from ring-necked parakeets, which are a species of bird that was unintentionally introduced to the United Kingdom. And a lock is rather interesting to do one-handed. Just lock the gate behind me. We haven't got any livestock, so it's not essential to lock gates, but it's always good practice if you are somewhere to leave a gate in the state you found it. This one was locked, so I've left it locked. Shut. Ditto this one. Again, quite a challenging lock to do. Just a chain to pull over. It's rather tight. Quite challenging to do one-handed whilst holding broadcast. But there we go. And you can see some fruits here. So again, an autumnal thing is of course fruit season. And these are berries of hawthorn. One of the relatively common hedgerow bushes or shrubs, and it produces these lovely red berries that are a good food source for the birds. And again, just a bit of a sign that autumn is now arriving, that we're starting to get all this fruitfulness and fruit generated. And yes, sloe gin season, so everyone says. Sloes are a different plant to that. I don't think you can make hawthorn gin, although I'm sure people would give it a try. But sloes are another plant called blackthorn, another hedgerow plant. We might find some of that in a minute. And then there's another autumnal sign of fruit. These are apples. They are probably a cross between the native crabapple species and the domestic apple. Plants that tend to get referred to as crabapple because they're clearly not sort of domestic commercial eating apples. And they're quite small and they're quite bitter, but actually the botany of it is more complicated than that. And I think there's the subtle features of the hairiness of the underside of the leaves, which I don't really know well enough to be able to say whether this is a proper crabapple or not. Nick, who's our resident botanist, might well. He's not resident, he doesn't live here, but he's much more knowledgeable on botany than me. But again, another good fruit source, and again some of the birds will take that, and particularly when the apples ripen and fall and are, as you can see here, on the ground as windfall and start to rot, they provide a good source of food for birds and insects and mammals and all sorts of things. So again, another bit of a sign that we're starting to move into autumn here, even though a lot of the woodland is still very green. You see here some of our standing deadwood that we like to leave up. Provides a good habitat for lots of things. As it slowly rots, fungi make use of it, insects make use of the rotting material. Bats may well, in places, use behind the bark as somewhere to roost. and this way. Wood pigeons flapping noisily out of the woods as we walk through. Quite a few wood pigeons expect coming here overnight. And another thing that's sort of autumnal, not really. Fungi does, of course, grow and produce fruiting bodies at any time of the year, but autumn does seem to be a particularly good time for fungi. And here is a group of, I think are called Shaggy Parasol mushrooms. Let me try and do something that might let us see them a bit better. If I do that, hopefully that will let me get down underneath them and have a more interesting angled view. So these are what I think are a relatively common species. There are several of them here. There's an interesting fly crawling on them. Okay, have a look at this fly. Whether that's just coincidentally there, or whether it's a type of fly that's got something to do with the fungus, I'm not sure. Don't think there's a way I can take a photograph whilst using this camera to broadcast. That could well be a type of fly that has something to do with the fungus. I'm just going to try briefly seeing if this works. This may interrupt the broadcast. So I'm not sure what happened, whether the broadcast kept going. Why did I just try to briefly stop to take a photograph of the fly, see if I can work out anything about it later. Fly ID isn't necessarily something I'm very good at. Well, it's something I am not very good at. But since we saw it, I thought I'd keep on with it and see what's interesting. We'll have to briefly review the broadcast and see what happens to a broadcast when I drop out of HAPS and take a photograph. Does it stop broadcasting for you guys when the camera's being used by something else, or does it keep behaving? Anyway, back to the woods rather than issues of using HAPS. So you can see the near oak here, which is already one which is a bit of a thinner canopy than many of the others, is starting to go yellower in its leaves. And there are some coloured leaves up there that are just going different shades. Let me see if I can zoom in a little. It's not going to want to focus nearby, is it? Yeah, well. And of course you can see the evidence of autumn's past on the ground. There's lots of leaf litter, good, fairly decent layer at the top of the soil here. Is this leaf litter and decaying organic matter turning into soil as it goes down, and this is again a really good thing, good substrate, good food source, good place for insects and invertebrates such like to hide. And it's all produced by the breakdown of the leaves from the deciduous trees in winter. It paused, did it, Fiona? Okay, I wondered what happened when I popped out. Right, so that means it can't do that. If I need to photograph things whilst I'm doing this, I'll need to bring a separate camera. Useful to know anyway. Let's go this way into the wood. Some more fungus, but in much more slug-eaten condition here. So the fungus providing a nice source of food for, I suspect, slugs and snails that would have chomped this. They do seem to like such stuff. This is probably the same species, a slightly less slug-eaten way. Wait for the camera to sort itself out. Rather nice bit of fungus. Again, I've not got any real idea what species it is. It's probably a common one, but I find fungus hard work to ID. Holly here. No berries on this one, but of course holly is one of those plants that has separate male and female plants, and only the females of course produce the berries, so maybe this is a male one, or it may just not have any berries on it at the moment. Evidence of some work here from some of our volunteers clearing away the bramble. Now, bramble is a native plant in Britain. You certainly don't want to eliminate it from the woodland, but it does tend to crowd out other stuff, and a bit of management, a bit of removal of it just increases the diversity of what the floor of the woodland looks like. So we have attempts to take some of this out occasionally, and here are some of the piles of the arisings. You can see where this oak has started to shed some of its leaves as they've started to go into autumn colours. And you can see this one actually in the middle of the leaf here has got a little wiggly line, and that's a leaf mine that's produced by the larva of probably either a moth or a fly that lives between the two layers of the leaf and eats away at the leaf from the inside. Now, I might hang on to that and see if I can identify that one when I get back. I'll just put it somewhere I can find it later. often at this time of year can be a good time of the year to look for leaf mines. This one's on hazel, I think, and fairly distinctive blotch stands out. Although not for the reason I was just talking about when I saw it. But again, these blotch mines will have inside them, or possibly have had inside them, the larva of some sort of insect. Again, I might well come and grab them in a bit later and try to ID them, and if they're still inside, try to rear them on. They might have something of note. I'll just leave that there to come back for. And then we'll go a bit further on into the woods. There's one of the nest boxes for some of our breeding birds. Blue tits and grey tits, mainly the nest boxes we have. And one of the jobs of sort of late autumn and winter is for one of our volunteers to go out and go through those nest boxes, clean out the old nests, make a note of what's in there. Sometimes you can identify the bird from its nest, but also whether there are any unhatched eggs, whether there are any dead chicks and things like that. And that can combine with the data that our licensed bird ringer has got for managing the site, looking after the place, and for managing those nest boxes. He's able to go in when the chicks are young, monitor them, weigh them, put little metal rings on their legs so they can be tracked if they're found elsewhere. Right, another bit of fungus to have a look at. Let's have a look down here. Okay, that's not worked this time. Let's try this. That seems to be. Rather diddy little fungus though. Quite attractive. So wander a bit further on. And some more bits of autumn again, some more starting to turn into those autumnal colours. And here's a bit of holly, which has got some berries on it. So, let's try and move this out the way and hopefully it'll focus. So this is obviously one of the female holly plants. It has the fruiting body, the berries growing on it. You can also see another leaf mine on that leaf next to the berries. Again, this is a fly mine. Some Phytosoma illicus, possibly. And it's a species that produces these fairly distinctive mines. I'll show us another one. Produces these fairly distinctive mines on the holly leaves. I've never knowingly seen the adult of this, the fly, it's with wings flying. But these mines are pretty common. Certainly if you're in the UK, I suspect most of Northern Europe at least, you will find these on holly if you've got holly. So pop out and have a look. Wood pigeons rattling away there, flying up. And we'll have a look at another of our ponds since we're passing it. Again, reasonably decent levels of water in this one. This is rather an over-shaded pond, so rather different in terms of what animals and what wildlife it supports compared to the pond we were looking at before. But still decent amounts of water in here. Quite clear water at the moment, not a lot of... we can't see through the reflection with the camera unless I somehow had a polarising filter. But water is pretty clear in there. And it's just starting to flow out here along the outlet stream. So that pond's about as full as it's going to get because it's flowing out. So any more water going in will just come out in some way. And then from here we'll head up onto the mound, an area of sort of man-made habitat made by people essentially dumping rubbish about 150 years ago, probably more, something in that order anyway. They bought barrels of barges full of rubbish up here and dumped it in a big heap, which nature has now taken back over and started to turn into habitat. Probably see something else with berries on up ahead. Not going to walk out to it, but I will put my binoculars up and see if I can work out what it is. So I think those berries are on a rowan tree. Again, autumnal fruit, something that will be attractive to birds, attractive to small mammals, and provide a food source through winter. And by doing that, the berries get eaten and they pass through the things that eat them and pass out somewhere else. And the plant gets to spread itself around, so it benefits from its fruit being eaten. And then we're coming up here to some banks of flowering ivy, which we've looked at a few times. They're an interestingly structured flower. I always like ivy flowers. I always find them rather an attractive plant. And they do produce quite a bit of nectar. I can certainly see a few wasps and bees visiting this. Let's see if there are any close enough to point the camera at. There's a bumblebee of some kind. Common carder bee, I think. Just flew off. But all making use of this source of high energy sugar that comes out particularly at this autumn time of year. Fiona's much better at bees than I am, so if Fiona agrees that's what it was, that's what it was. Here's one of the wasps. If it turns around whilst I'm looking, yeah, it was common wasp, Vespula vulgaris. I just got a sight of the front of the face, which is how it's separated from one of the other common wasps, Vespula germanica, or the German wasp. We don't have many ivy bees, the head of eye ones at all. They seem remarkably missing here. Possibly because there were too many honeybees in the area. Yes, I knew what you meant, Fiona. Autocorrect really needs to learn to do natural history a bit better. There's some very small flies flying around here. Some sort of hoverfly, but it got away. So there we go, looking across the wood. You can see a bit of the start of autumn happening here. Some of the trees having shed many of their leaves already, but a lot of them still really being pretty green, perhaps bits of yellow coming in. Not particularly autumnal, but here's a nice little spider. Just saw it crawling across on a silk thread, which I'm trying to avoid twanging with the camera. Again, I'm not particularly going to try and identify this as a species. Well, I'm not going to try to identify it at species level at all. It may be a doable one if I took some good photos or kept a specimen. Who knows? Well, we'll wander a little bit further. Anything else to note? Then again, more nice autumnal leaves here, yellowed and fallen off the tree. Our smaller clump growing here in the wood. Again, providing bits of nectar. No, I'm going to go that way. See if I can find something I saw before. Can't quite remember where in the wood I saw it. It's the only problem. but we'll wander this way. Some more fruit. These are blackberries, plant in the Rubus fructicose aggregate of plants. Very familiar hedgerow plant. Produces these berries which turn eventually much more rich purple or black than these red ones which aren't fully mature. Get another good sign of autumn. Our canal, the canal that runs by. You see one of the canal boats there. And then we're back at the edge of that meadow that we started in. Some nice muddy ditches and muddy edges. Can be a good place for birds such as woodcock in this sort of muddy ditch, although I've not seen one for a while. They too tend to protect themselves by just sitting still almost until you step on them, so not seeing one doesn't mean they aren't there. And nice little clump of fungi which I think we'll go and have a look at to end on. You can see it through the fence line there behind, but I'll hop through the hedge. I think it's velvet shank. I think that's what species of fungus that is. But we'll end on that because it's pretty and it's orange and it's therefore nicely autumnal. Hence a good place to end the broadcast. I have to end it soon anyway, because I've just got a warning that I've used up most of my data for this month. We've got another couple of days to go on the month, so that shouldn't be a problem. And yes, here we are, a nice orange clump of fungus. Looking from underneath. From underneath this way. We're going to behave again. No, let's try it again. Turn the camera over, thank you. Looking from underneath, you can see the structure of the fungus. These gills and a stem with rather a velvety structure to it. So I'm hoping that well, I'm thinking that is probably the one called velvet shank. I can't remember the scientific name. But rather an attractive fungus and probably a good place on which to end today's broadcast. Bit of an autumnal look starting here in Perivale.